America fought an entire revolution to get rid of royalty, then spent the next 2 centuries inventing replacement royals out of actors, because deep down we are a nation of hypocrites with excellent taste in cheekbones. Bogart and Bacall, Lucy and Desi, Newman and Woodward. We hang the wedding portraits of complete strangers in the national living room and dare anybody to take them down. A good Hollywood marriage isn't gossip to us, it's scripture. And few couples preached that scripture harder than Elizabeth Montgomery and William Asher. She starred as Samantha Stevens, the most adored witch in the history of American television, on a sitcom that her own husband directed and produced, which means the fantasy of a perfect marriage functioned quite literally as the family business. The pitch worked. Bewitched sold America a gorgeous supernatural wife, a devoted household, and a world where every problem dissolved before the end credits and the country bought every single episode. Behind the cameras, the marriage powering the whole operation quietly chewed through its own wiring, and look at what the show itself kept selling, because the premise reads like a mission statement for the marriage behind it. A woman with extraordinary power chooses domestic life, folds her gifts into the service of a household, and repairs every mess before bedtime with a flick of her face. Millions of people took that in weekly as light comedy. Nobody watching suspected how much heavy lifting the fantasy performed off-screen. Movie stars live on mountaintops, but television stars live in your house. Samantha showed up in American living rooms every week for 8 seasons, folded into dinner hours and homework and the couch cushions, which turned the Montgomery and Asher marriage into something less like celebrity news and more like something happening to people you actually knew. That difference matters. When a movie couple splits, a magazine sells a few extra copies. When a television couple splits, a piece of furniture goes missing from the national home. Only the early 60s could have produced this arrangement. Television, fresh from conquering the American home, ruled the national evening. The old studio system wobbled on its foundations, and a well-run sitcom could deliver something the movies never managed. The same faces, in the same living room, at the same hour, every week, until the audience stopped distinguishing between the characters and the people playing them. Into that machine walked a married couple selling a story about marriage. What could possibly go wrong? Now, the title of this video promises 11 years of hell, and I want to level with you right away because that number hides a much stranger story than the phrase suggests. What actually unfolded between 1962 and the mid-70s involves an alcoholic movie star, a quickie divorce in Mexico, a secret wedding in El Paso, an Emmy, 2 pregnancies written into a television script like plot devices, a decade of documented cheating, and 1 betrayal aimed so precisely that it killed one of the biggest shows on the air. Before we get to the wreck, you need to meet the drivers. Elizabeth Montgomery grew up inside the blast radius of a famous last name, the daughter of actor Robert Montgomery, and if you believe her biographers, that particular shadow never fully lifted. Hold on to the father, he returns later and not in a flattering role. For now, what matters is that by the early 1960s, marriage number 1 sat in her rearview mirror, while marriage number 2, the one the record describes with words like volatile, still churned around her. Growing up second-generation Hollywood does strange things to a person. Your last name opens every door in town and then stands in the doorway watching how you walk through it. So every achievement gets an asterisk and every failure gets a comparison. The biographers describe the relationship between Elizabeth and her father as strained, and while the details stay murky, that strain quietly becomes a load-bearing part of this story later on. Enter husband number 2, actor Gig Young, whose marriage to Montgomery, per multiple biographies, ran emotionally hot and buckled under the weight of his severe alcoholism. Living with a drinker at that level is less like weathering a storm and more like moving to a bad climate, because the drinking stops being an event and becomes the weather you dress for every morning. By late 1962, whatever held the thing together started giving out. Multiple biographies agree on the volatility, which in Hollywood biography terms, where sources contradict each other for sport, counts as rare consensus. Across town, William Asher built himself a very different kind of life. 12 years older than Montgomery, he worked as a director and producer. And it's worth pausing on what those two jobs actually mean because the pairing matters to everything that follows. A director runs the set day to day, deciding where the camera goes and how a scene breathes. A producer controls the money, the schedule, and ultimately the show itself. Do both jobs at once, and you become the closest thing a soundstage has to a head of state. Every marriage negotiates power somehow, and this one would end up negotiating it on a soundstage in front of an entire crew for a decade. On paper, Asher entered this story a free man, having legally divorced his first wife, actress Danny Sue Nolan, in 1961. His biographers, though, note that his personal life remained complicated, which is the phrase historians deploy when they're being polite about something they'd rather not spell out in a chapter heading. Remember that wording, because it gets a lot less polite as we go. Film sets compress people. 14-hour days, shared meals, a common enemy in the schedule. A production manufactures intimacy on a deadline, and it does so with zero regard for anybody's existing marriage certificate. In September of 1962, the cameras rolled on a crime picture called Johnny Cool, a film history barely remembers, with Asher directing and producing and Montgomery playing a supporting role. Nobody puts Johnny Cool on a list of important American movies, and honestly, that's my favorite detail in this chapter. History's biggest dominoes rarely look like dominoes at the time. Sometimes a mid-budget crime picture exists for no grander reason than to put two specific people on the same set for a few months in the fall of 1962. The movie faded, the consequences didn't. She walked onto that set still legally married to Gig Young, and behind the camera stood a recently divorced director 12 years her senior whose attention, by the nature of the job, landed on her all day, every day. Nobody involved occupied a simple situation, and whatever sparked between them sparked anyway. Then the timeline starts moving fast. Montgomery flew to Mexico in January of 1963 and secured a divorce from Young, which sounds scandalous to modern ears, but functioned in that era as the industry's express lane around an American legal system that turned ending a marriage into something slow and public and ugly. I swear a Mexican divorce shows up in every one of these mid-century Hollywood stories. After Johnny Cool wrapped, the professional relationship between director and actress turned openly romantic. Understand the environment they operated in. Early 60s Hollywood ran a gossip economy with columnists as its central bank, and a leading lady fresh off a Mexican divorce romancing the older director from her last picture supplied exactly the kind of currency that economy loved to print. Discretion in that world amounted to survival, not paranoia. Before we continue, if this story pulled you in, do me one small favor before you vanish back into the algorithm. Hit subscribe, because we dig up the messy, complicated truth behind Hollywood's prettiest postcards every single week, and you don't want to miss what we've found next. Then drop a comment telling me which so-called perfect couple or classic star you want covered, since the best episodes on this channel started as suggestions from viewers exactly like you. On October 26, 1963, they married in El Paso, Texas. Now, El Paso is not where Hollywood royalty throws a wedding. El Paso is where you get married when the entire point is that nobody's watching. The record doesn't spell out their reasoning, but the choice tells you plenty. From the very first day, this couple understood how to control a story. And control it they did. The marriage stayed almost entirely hidden from the press until January of 1964, when Montgomery announced her pregnancy with their first child, meaning the public learned about this wedding the way a sitcom audience learns everything, through a baby reveal. Even that announcement did double duty, breaking the news of the marriage and softening it in the same breath, which is frankly elegant public relations. Secret courtship, border town wedding, surprise reveal. The Ashers ran narrative sleight of hand before they ever ran a television show. This next part is genuinely sweet, which only makes everything after it hurt worse. Freshly married, Montgomery wanted to pull way back from acting and pour herself into raising a family, the kind of decision the industry usually treats as a career funeral with better catering. Asher recognized her talent and her star potential, refused to watch that go dark, and pitched a third option, a television project the two of them could build together, sharing the same hours on the same lot. Most husbands bring home flowers. This one built his wife a sitcom. Think about what the arrangement meant in practice, though, because it cuts both ways. Same call sheet, same commute, a marriage and a workplace fused into a single organism with no version of leaving your problems at the office because the office slept in your bed. When it worked, it probably felt like beating the whole system. When it stopped working, there would be no door left to close. Bewitched premiered in September of 1964 and detonated on contact, an immediate cultural and commercial smash, the kind of hit that rearranges a network's furniture. Asher directed episode after episode and collected an Emmy for the work in 1966. By the fourth season, he took over as the show's primary producer, which means the man now controlled the camera, the budget, the schedule, and the professional existence of his own wife. If you remember the head of state thing from earlier, consider the election settled. Take a second to imagine the actual texture of that job. Asher spent his days giving performance notes to the woman he woke up next to, judging her takes, setting her schedule, approving her close-ups, and then the two of them drove home to the same dinner table as though none of it followed them through the front door. Plenty of couples can't survive assembling furniture together. These two ran a national television production out of their marriage and passed it off as easy. By every account, the collaboration ran beautifully. Their partnership earned a reputation as one of the most effective in the business, and week after week the machine hummed. The wife starred, the husband directed and produced, the ratings held, and the public swallowed the arrangement whole as proof that a marriage really could run on shared magic. Colleagues watched them operate like a single organism with two job titles, and for years the whole setup produced nothing but evidence that mixing marriage and management could actually work. Which brings us to the twitch, the most famous piece of face acting in the history of the medium. Pop culture lore insists that Asher invented Samantha's nose twitch after watching a real nervous habit of Montgomery's, a private tic promoted into a national catchphrase, and I would love to tell you that's confirmed. Media historians call it an unverifiable legend. It gets better, though, because the mechanics are a lie twice over. The famous nose twitch isn't even a nose twitch, since Montgomery actually wiggled her upper lip while the camera misread the whole thing. America's most celebrated nose never moved. Hold on to that image because we're going to need it at the end. Children arrived at roughly the pace of production seasons. William Allen Asher came first on July 24, 1964, a few weeks before the show ever aired. Robert Deverell followed on October 5, 1965, and Rebecca Elizabeth completed the set on June 17, 1969. That's 3 kids delivered by a woman simultaneously carrying one of the biggest programs on television. Do the math on that workload, because between 1964 and 1969, Montgomery shot season after season of network television while pregnant for a decent chunk of it, a schedule that would flatten most humans of any era. A pregnant lead actress in the 1960s normally meant a halted production or a season of creative camera angles behind increasingly enormous houseplants, and this show refused both options with a shrug. Montgomery's real pregnancies with Robert and Rebecca landed straight in the scripts, becoming Samantha's on-screen pregnancies and delivering the characters Tabitha and Adam Stevens to the viewing public, which means 2 of the Asher children existed as plot points before they existed as people. William, born before the premiere, missed his shot at prenatal television immortality entirely. Rough break, kid. Publicly, the whole package gleamed. The world saw a beautiful family and a wholesome empire, anchored by a couple whose real marriage appeared to certify the fictional one, a feedback loop that no publicity department could have designed better on purpose. Their kids grew up with a soundstage for a playground. From the outside, you could not have drawn a happier picture with crayons. All 3 children eventually entered the family trade, building grown-up careers as directors, editors, and producers, which means the creative bloodline survived everything you're about to hear. Whatever else this marriage broke, and it broke plenty, the family business outlived it. Keep that in one hand while the next chapter fills the other. Time to flip the postcard over. In 2012, author Herbie J. Pilato published Twitch Upon a Star, the authorized biography of Elizabeth Montgomery, and I need you to sit with that word authorized because it means this is the sanctioned account rather than some tabloid hatchet job, which makes what's inside heavier, not lighter. According to Pilato, William Asher cheated on Montgomery chronically across the entire length of the marriage, not one slip and not one bad year, but a pattern running the full decade. Chronic is the biography's word, not mine. And coming from the sanctioned account of Montgomery's own life, it lands like a verdict. Pop culture historian Jeffrey Mark pushes the start date back even further, claiming the infidelities began during the courtship itself. Absorb that for a second. Before the vows in El Paso, before Bewitched existed as an idea, before a single wedding photo, the behavior that would eventually rot this marriage from the inside, if Mark is right, already hummed along at full speed. Now stack that against the structure of their lives. The fused marriage and workplace design turns from charming to claustrophobic the moment something goes wrong inside it. No retreat existed for Montgomery, even if she wanted distance, since her husband doubled as her director, her producer, and her employer. The man calling action at 9 the next morning, regardless of what the marriage looked like the night before. A normal, troubled marriage keeps rooms to walk away into. This one came with a call sheet. Meanwhile, the country kept watching A Perfect Marriage every single week, blissfully unaware of the arithmetic behind it. Millions of viewers absorbed a story about a devoted household while, per the authorized record, the real husband strayed on a schedule of his own, and the dramatic irony would land as delicious if actual people didn't live inside it. 10 years is a long time to keep 2 sets of books. You might wonder why nobody just pulled the plug earlier, and the answer sits in plain sight. Walking away meant detonating a hit show, a shared fortune, an entire crew's livelihood, and a public image worth protecting, all of it tangled around 3 small children, so the path of least resistance won out. Keep filming, keep smiling, keep the machine fed. Momentum is a hell of a marriage counselor. So why did a talented, famous, fiercely capable woman walk into this and stay for a decade? Her biographers float a theory, and I want to handle it with tongs. Pilato and Mark both point to Montgomery's strained relationship with her father, actor Robert Montgomery, and suggest that marrying Asher, an older man, an authority figure, a director who ran every room she worked in, may have been a way of subconsciously replaying old emotional cycles in pursuit of paternal approval. Told you the father would come back, and if you squint, the theory does explain the shape of things. Robert Montgomery, the famous actor father she reportedly struggled to please. William Asher, the older director positioned above her at work every single day, evaluating her performance for a living. The same figure recast. It's tidy, almost suspiciously so, which is exactly why the next paragraph exists. To be crystal clear about this, that theory is speculation, armchair psychology aimed at someone who isn't around to argue back, and even the biographers who float it present it as interpretation rather than established fact. It sits in the record because it's the best explanation anybody has come up with, not because anybody proved it. I'm allergic to psychoanalyzing the dead, so we'll leave it right there. And through all of it, the machine kept running. Whatever corroded underneath, the on-set partnership stayed functional and the show stayed enormous, season after season, right up until the corrosion finally reached a load-bearing wall. Meet Richard Michaels. A director on Bewitched, Michaels orbited the couple from the show's earliest days, close enough to count as family and trusted enough to help steer the ship, and Asher regarded him as something more specific than a colleague. A protege, the guy you train up because you see a younger version of yourself in him. In a town that runs on ambition, Asher handed this man his trust. You can hear the piano wire tightening from here. Mentorship in that business carries something almost feudal in it. You hand a younger man your methods, your sets, your standing, and in exchange he carries your way of working into the future, the closest thing a director gets to a legacy while still breathing. Keep that weight in mind for what comes next. During the 8th season, 1971 into 1972, Montgomery began an affair with Michaels. Set against a decade of her husband's documented cheating, biographers read the move as retaliation. And if retaliation describes it, look at the aim. Not a stranger, not some actor from another lot, but the one man whose betrayal would wound Asher through the marriage and the mentorship in a single stroke. Whether she chose that target consciously, nobody can say, and the damage didn't much care either way. Picture the daily logistics, because they're brutal. Every morning, a husband, his wife, and his wife's lover reported to the same soundstage to manufacture a comedy about marital devotion, in front of a crew watching the whole thing sour in real time. Sets run on trust the way engines run on fuel, and this one suddenly ran on fumes and resentment. The working environment didn't erode so much as collapse, with 8 seasons of goodwill draining out in a matter of months. Here the story earns its strangest fact. The professional partnership between Montgomery and Asher became untenable, and that breakdown, more than any other force in play, became the primary catalyst for the cancellation of Bewitched in 1972. America's most beloved witch didn't lose her show to an audience, she lost it to a marriage. Bewitched suffered less a cancellation than a divorce. And that's how one of television's biggest hits left the air, not with a creative flameout, but with a marriage disintegrating faster than any script could paper over. And if you want this video's whole thesis, it fits in one line. The witch faded to black because the wedding did. Aftermath on rails, separation, lawyers, filings, you know the story, blah, blah, blah. Their divorce became final somewhere between 1973 and 1974, closing the books on a union that lasted just over a decade and produced 3 children, 1 television empire, and a genuinely impressive volume of wreckage. No dramatic courtroom showdown survives in the record, and I'm not going to invent one for you. And what about the affair that brought the whole thing down? Montgomery and Michaels moved in together and lasted roughly 2.5 years before separating in 1975. Hold that up to the light for a second. The relationship that ended a 10-year marriage, torched a mentorship, and helped kill one of the most successful sitcoms ever produced survived about 30 months, which is less time than most refrigerators. Nobody received a reconciliation arc either. The record hands us no tearful reunion and no late-life friendship montage, just 2 careers moving apart, and the accounts assembled years later once the dust settled into history. Years later, Asher talked. Before his death, he sat with Pilato, and the old director showed a degree of introspection about the collapse, owning his part in it without dressing it up. Bill told me it was his fault. He had had an affair, Pilato reported. Even then, one wound refused to close because, according to Pilato, Asher stayed deeply hurt by the specific shape of what happened. Out of every man in Hollywood, his wife's affair landed on his own protege, and decades on, that detail still burned. Notice how much of this accounting arrives through Asher's late-life interviews and the biographer's reconstructions rather than from Montgomery herself, so the record we have hears the husband's regret more clearly than the wife's reasons. Take that imbalance into account because it quietly shapes everything we think we know. History, like television, keeps its own camera angles. So, did those 11 years really amount to hell? Honestly, the record refuses to make it that simple, and the complicated version is more interesting anyway. For the better part of a decade, Elizabeth Montgomery and William Asher raised 3 children, built a television empire out of their own living room, and ran one of the most effective creative partnerships the medium has ever produced. Flattening all of that into a horror story does violence to 2 complicated people. Consider what they actually pulled off together. Few married couples in the history of the medium have managed anything close, and these 2 did it while raising small children, filming through pregnancies and holding down a weekly production schedule that chews through healthy marriages for sport. Calling all of that hell erases real work and, by every indication, something that began as real love. But the record keeps a second ledger, and it's just as real. A husband who, per the authorized biography, cheated from the courtship onward, and a wife who answered at the very end with the one affair built to cut deepest. Neither ledger cancels the other out. Between them sits everything else this story holds, the secrecy and the show, the children written into scripts, the set that curdled, the friendship that became a weapon, and the strange fact that the partnership stayed brilliant right up until the moment it stopped existing. So no, I won't hand you a clean verdict. 11 Years of Hell flatters the drama and shortchanges the humans, while a fairy tale framing insults everything the record documents, and the honest version lives in the overlap, a partnership that genuinely worked, strapped to a marriage that genuinely didn't. They kept both running for a decade, which almost nobody else could have managed. We crown these couples because we need them. A country without kings still craves the sight of two golden people who appear to solve each other, and every week for 8 seasons the Ashers delivered exactly that, on schedule with a laugh track. Off camera, nobody ended up solved. The woman playing the most powerful wife in America married, if her biographers are right, a new version of an old wound, and the man directing the perfect marriage never managed to stay faithful to his real one. Which brings us back to the nose, and exactly as promised. Television's most famous twitch never involved a twitch at all. An upper lip performed the real work while the camera printed the legend, a small daily illusion an entire country agreed to believe because the illusion outshone the mechanics. Their marriage received the same edit. What the audience saw moved them, and what actually moved stayed hidden a few inches away the whole time. Samantha could repair a broken world with one flick of her face. In the end, the only marriage she couldn't save turned out to be the one that invented her.